The dust swirled through the streets of Riverton, Wyoming like a vengeful ghost, painting the morning sky a hazy amber as Nathan Aldridge rode into town, his reputation preceding him like the long shadow he cast. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild enough that men like Nathan, with his weathered face, calloused hands, and eyes that had seen too much death, commanded both fear and respect with their mere presence. Nathan dismounted his chestnut stallion outside the saloon, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk as he stretched his tall frame. 3 weeks on the trail driving cattle had left him with an aching back, an empty pocket, and a thirst that only whiskey could quench. The townsfolk scattered at his approach, mothers pulling children close, men nodding respectfully before finding urgent business elsewhere. Nathan was used to this reception. He had earned it through years of hard living and harder fighting. Inside, the saloon fell quiet as he entered, conversations halting mid-sentence. He paid no mind as he approached the bar, dropping his hat beside him and running a hand through his dark, dust-caked hair. "Whiskey," he said simply, voice rough from disuse. The bartender, a portly man with nervous eyes, poured the amber liquid quickly. "Mr. Aldridge, good to see you back in Riverton." Nathan didn't respond, merely tossed back the drink and gestured for another. He hadn't come to talk. He never did. The piano in the corner resumed its tinny melody, and slowly the conversations around him picked up again, though noticeably quieter than before. Nathan sipped his second drink more slowly, letting the burn travel down his throat as he contemplated his next move. The cattle drive had earned him enough to last through winter if he was careful, which meant a few months of blissful solitude at his small ranch outside town. The saloon doors swung open again, admitting Sheriff Davis and his deputy. Their eyes immediately found Nathan, and with deliberate steps they approached. "Aldridge," the sheriff nodded, his hand resting casually near his pistol. "Thought you might be back." "Sheriff," Nathan replied, not turning to face the man. "Any trouble on the trail?" "Nothing I couldn't handle." The sheriff seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "There's been talk about what happened in Cheyenne last month." Nathan's jaw tightened, but his expression remained impassive. "There's always talk. 3 men dead is more than just talk." "Self-defense," Nathan said flatly. "Ask the judge who cleared me." The tension between them stretched like a taut rope, the entire saloon holding its breath. Finally, the sheriff nodded once. "Just keep the peace while you're here, Aldridge. I won't have trouble in my town." As the lawman departed, Nathan ordered a third whiskey, allowing himself a moment of reflection. He hadn't always been this man feared, isolated, spoken about in hushed tones. There had been a time, years ago, when he'd been different. Before the war, before his family's land was seized, before he'd learned that in this world, a man survived by being harder and faster than those who would take from him. His brooding was interrupted by a commotion outside. Raised voices carried through the swinging doors, followed by a woman's indignant cry. Nathan wouldn't normally involve himself in other people's business. That was a good way to end up dead in these parts, but something in that voice stirred something long forgotten in his chest. Curiosity got the better of him. He tossed a coin on the bar and strode outside, squinting in the harsh sunlight. The source of the disturbance was immediately apparent. A young woman stood defiantly before the general store, facing down the proprietor, who clutched a sack of flour to his chest. Even from a distance, Nathan could see she was in poor shape. Her dress, once fine but now patched and worn, hung loosely on her thin frame. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones too pronounced, eyes too large in their hollowed sockets. "I told you, miss, I can't extend any more credit," the storekeeper was saying, though he looked uncomfortable in the face of her obvious desperation. Mr. Blackwood was clear about that. "Please, Mr. Porter," the woman pleaded, her voice wavering but determined. "Just until the end of the month. I'll have money then, I promise." "That's what you said last month, Miss Hammond. I'm sorry, truly I am." Nathan found himself moving forward without conscious decision, drawn by something in the woman's proud stance despite her obvious desperation. As he approached, he got a better look at her. She was young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair escaping from a once neat bun. Despite her gauntness, there was beauty in her fine features and clear blue eyes that now shone with unshed tears of frustration. She sensed his approach and turned, her expression shifting from desperation to wariness as she took in his intimidating figure. Nathan was used to such reactions, especially from women, but it still stung in a way he would never admit. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing the question at neither of them specifically. The storekeeper Porter recognized him and paled slightly. "No problem, Mr. Aldridge, just a matter of business." The woman straightened, summoning dignity from some hidden reserve. "It's nothing that concerns you, sir." Her voice was cultured with an Eastern accent that stood out in Wyoming territory. Nathan's curiosity deepened. What was an Eastern lady doing out here, alone and starving? "How much does she owe?" Nathan asked Porter directly. The storekeeper shifted uncomfortably. "It's not just this purchase, sir. Miss Hammond has an outstanding account of $15. A considerable sum, but not to a man who'd just been paid for a cattle drive." "I don't need charity," the woman interrupted, color rising in her pale cheeks. Nathan met her eyes. "Never said it was charity." He turned back to Porter. "I'll settle her account and add another $10 of credit." Porter looked between them, then nodded hastily, eager to be done with the uncomfortable situation. "Yes, sir, Mr. Aldridge." "No," the woman protested. "I can't accept." Whatever else she meant to say was lost as her eyes suddenly rolled back. Nathan moved with the instinctive speed that had saved his life many times, catching her as she crumpled forward. Her weight was alarmingly light in his arms, and through the thin fabric of her dress, he could feel every rib. She'd been starving, he realized with a jolt of unexpected compassion, starving herself while maintaining that stubborn pride. "Miss," he said gruffly, awkwardly patting her cheek. "Miss, can you hear me?" A small crowd had gathered, watching with undisguised curiosity as the notorious Nathan Aldridge cradled an unconscious woman in his arms with surprising gentleness. "She needs a doctor," someone suggested. Nathan nodded, lifting her easily. Her head lolled against his chest, and a strange protective instinct surged through him. "Where's the doctor's office?" "End of the street," Porter replied. "But Doc Matthews is out at the Miller farm delivering a baby." Nathan cursed under his breath. "What's her name?" "Her full name." "Felicity Hammond," Porter supplied. "She came to town about 6 months ago, trying to make a go of the old Harper place outside town." That explained some things. The Harper place had been abandoned for years after the family was killed in an Indian raid. The soil was good, but the buildings were in disrepair, and it was too much land for a woman alone to manage. "She got any family?" "Anyone who can look after her," Porter shook his head. "Not that anyone knows of, keeps to herself mostly." Nathan made a decision then that would alter the course of his life, though he couldn't have known it at the time. "Porter, have that food delivered to my ranch, and send word to Mrs. Wilson to meet me there." Without waiting for a response, he carried Felicity to where his horse waited. With careful movements that belied his rough exterior, he mounted with her secure in his arms, her body frighteningly light against him. As he rode out of town, her breath shallow against his neck, Nathan tried to understand his own actions. He wasn't the type to involve himself in others' problems, especially not a woman's. Yet something about Felicity Hammond's proud desperation had pierced the armor he'd built around himself over years of solitary existence. His ranch came into view, a modest affair with a small but solid cabin, a barn, and a corral where his few horses grazed. It wasn't much, but it was his, paid for with years of dangerous work and careful saving. He rarely brought visitors here. It was his sanctuary from a world he largely despised. Dismounting carefully with Felicity still in his arms, Nathan kicked open his front door and carried her to his bed, the only one in the cabin. He laid her down gently, then stood awkwardly, uncertain what to do next. He'd never tended to an ill woman before. He fetched water from the pump outside, and finding a clean cloth, hesitantly wiped the dust from her face. Up close, the evidence of her malnourishment was even more apparent: the shadows beneath her eyes, the sharpness of her collarbones visible above the neckline of her dress, the blue veins prominent at her temples. What kind of pride or desperation would drive a woman to this state rather than ask for help? Nathan found himself wondering about her story, an unusual curiosity for a man who generally preferred not to know too much about others. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mrs. Wilson, the closest thing Riverton had to a nurse. The sturdy widow took one look at the situation and took charge, shooing Nathan outside while she tended to Felicity. Nathan paced the yard, oddly anxious. He told himself it was merely concern for a fellow human in distress, nothing more. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. Something about Felicity Hammond had awakened feelings he'd thought long dead: protectiveness, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite name. After what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Wilson emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. "She'll be all right with proper care," she announced without preamble. "Exhaustion and malnutrition, as you suspected. She needs rest and regular meals. Small portions at first, mind you, or her stomach will reject it." Nathan nodded, absorbing the instructions. "She's awake now," Mrs. Wilson continued, giving him a shrewd look. "Confused and embarrassed, poor thing. Says she wants to go home, but I've told her she's in no condition to be alone." "She can stay here until she's recovered," Nathan heard himself say, surprising both Mrs. Wilson and himself. The older woman raised an eyebrow. "That would cause talk, Mr. Aldridge." Nathan scowled. "I'll sleep in the barn." Mrs. Wilson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll stay tonight as well, to ensure there are no complications, and I'll bring some of my clothes tomorrow. She needs something that fits better than those rags she's wearing." As the older woman returned to the cabin, Nathan remained outside, watching the sun begin its descent behind the distant mountains. He'd acted impulsively today, breaking his own rules about getting involved in others' troubles. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it, not when the image of Felicity collapsing into his arms remained so vivid in his mind. Inside, Felicity Hammond lay in a stranger's bed, mortification burning through her despite her weakness. She had fainted in the middle of town in front of everyone. And not just anyone had caught her, but Nathan Aldridge, a man whose name was spoken with fear and respect throughout the territory. She'd heard the stories since arriving in Riverton. A dangerous man, they said. A killer. A loner who wanted nothing to do with townsfolk or their problems. Yet he had paid her debt and brought her to his home. It made no sense, and Felicity was too exhausted to puzzle it out now. Tomorrow, she would thank him properly and return to her own homestead, where a mountain of work awaited her. She could not afford this weakness, this dependence on others. Not when everything she had worked for hung in the balance. As sleep claimed her again, Felicity's last thought was of strong arms catching her fall, and a pair of green eyes that, despite their hardness, had looked at her with something that might have been concern. The following morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Felicity awakened slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back, bringing with them a fresh wave of embarrassment. She attempted to sit up, only to find herself surprisingly weak. "Easy now," came Mrs. Wilson's voice as she entered the small bedroom. "You're not going anywhere just yet." Felicity's protest died on her lips as a wave of dizziness swept over her. She sank back against the pillow, frustration evident in her expression. "Where is Mr. Aldridge?" she asked, realizing she hadn't heard any movement in the cabin. "Outside tending to his horses. Been up since before dawn, that one, Mrs." Wilson set down a tray with a bowl of thin porridge and a cup of tea. "He's not much for conversation, but he's been asking after you." Felicity couldn't imagine the intimidating cowboy expressing concern for her well-being. "I've imposed on his hospitality long enough. Once I've eaten, I should return to my farm." Mrs. Wilson's expression turned stern. "Miss Hammond, you're suffering from starvation. Your body needs rest and nourishment, not more work. Besides, Mr. Aldridge has already ridden out to check on your place." "He what?" Felicity struggled to sit up again, this time successfully. "He had no right, he had every right, considering you collapsed in his arms yesterday," Mrs. Wilson interrupted, helping Felicity adjust her pillows. "Now eat. Small bites, mind you." Felicity reluctantly began to eat, finding that even the simple act of lifting the spoon required more energy than she expected. The porridge was plain but well made, lightly sweetened with honey. "Why would he help me?" she asked after several spoonfuls. "Everyone says he keeps to himself." Mrs. Wilson's eyes softened. "Nathan Aldridge wasn't always the man you see now. There was a time when he was as kind and open-hearted as any young man. The war changed him, as it did many. Then losing his family's ranch to taxes while he was fighting, well, it hardened him." Felicity digested this information along with her porridge. "Still, that doesn't explain why he'd help a stranger." "Perhaps you reminded him of someone," Mrs. Wilson suggested enigmatically. "Or perhaps there's still enough of the old Nathan in there to recognize someone in genuine need." Before Felicity could respond, the cabin door opened and Nathan himself entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His gaze immediately found hers, sharp and assessing. "You're awake," he said simply. "Yes." Felicity straightened, uncomfortable with her vulnerability before this man. "Mr. Aldridge, I must thank you for your assistance yesterday. It was unexpected." A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, crossed his features before disappearing. "Most folks don't expect much good from me these days. Mrs. Wilson tells me you visited my farm," Felicity continued, deciding to address the matter directly. Nathan nodded, moving to pour himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Your crops need water. Your chicken coop has a hole in the roof, and your mule is ornery as hell." Despite herself, Felicity smiled. "Bartholomew has strong opinions about strangers." "Bartholomew?" Nathan raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You named your mule Bartholomew." "He came with the name," Felicity defended, though it wasn't entirely true. The name had simply suited the stubborn animal's dignified demeanor. A moment of unexpected warmth passed between them, surprising them both. Nathan cleared his throat and turned away, moving to the table where he began cleaning a saddle that didn't need cleaning. "I watered your crops and fixed the coop," he said without looking up. "The mule and I reached an understanding." Felicity was momentarily speechless. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." Mrs. Wilson glanced between them with knowing eyes. "I'm going to fetch those clothes I mentioned. Miss Hammond, You finish that porridge." After the older woman departed, an awkward silence filled the cabin. Nathan continued working on his saddle while Felicity forced herself to eat despite her growing discomfort with the situation. "Mr. Aldridge," she finally said, "I appreciate your kindness, truly, but I can't stay here. I have responsibilities." Nathan looked up, his expression unreadable. "Your responsibilities will still be there when you're strong enough to handle them." "You don't understand," Felicity insisted, setting aside her half-eaten porridge. "If I don't meet the terms of my agreement, I'll lose the farm." This caught his attention. "What agreement?" Felicity hesitated, unwilling to share her troubles with this stranger. Yet something in his steady gaze compelled honesty. "When I purchased the Harper place, I could only afford the down payment. Mr. Blackwood from the bank arranged a loan, but the terms—" She paused, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "The terms require that I show progress in rehabilitating the farm within 6 months. I must harvest a minimum quantity of crops and make regular payments. If I fail to meet these conditions by the end of the month, ownership reverts to the bank." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes. "And Blackwood's already eyeing your failure." It wasn't a question, but Felicity nodded anyway. "He visits regularly to check on his investment. Each time he suggests that the work is too much for a woman alone and that I should consider alternative arrangements." Nathan's jaw tightened. He knew Blackwood's reputation. The banker had a habit of offering predatory loans to desperate people, particularly women without male protection. When they inevitably struggled with the harsh realities of frontier life, he would swoop in to rescue them, usually at the cost of their dignity and independence. "How much do you owe him?" Nathan asked. "That's not your concern," Felicity replied, lifting her chin with the same pride he'd witnessed in town. "I made it my concern when I carried you unconscious to my home," he countered. They stared at each other, mutual stubbornness evident in their expressions. Finally, Felicity sighed. $200 by the end of the month, plus proof that the farm is viable." She looked away. A nearly impossible sum, especially now. Nathan considered this. $200 was a significant amount, but not beyond his means after the cattle drive. Yet he sensed that offering money would only offend her pride further. "The crops you've planted look good," he said instead. "With proper care, they'll yield enough to satisfy the viable part of your agreement." "But not enough to sell and make the payment," Felicity pointed out. "One problem at a time," Nathan advised, returning to his saddle. "First, you need to recover your strength." Felicity wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was creeping over her again. Even their brief conversation had drained her limited reserves. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Nathan's hand stilled on the leather. He didn't look up when he answered. "I know what it's like to fight for what's yours against those who would take it," he said simply. "Get some rest, Miss Hammond." As Felicity drifted back to sleep, puzzling over this unexpected ally, Nathan remained at the table, his thoughts turning to Josiah Blackwood. The banker was a vulture, preying on the vulnerable, and Nathan had long despised him from a distance. Now it seemed that distance had closed considerably. For the next several days, Felicity remained at Nathan's cabin, gradually regaining her strength under Mrs. Wilson's watchful eye. Nathan himself was an irregular presence, often leaving at dawn and returning late, offering little explanation for his absences. When he was present, he was quiet but not unkind, ensuring she had everything she needed without being intrusive. On the third morning, Felicity awoke feeling significantly stronger. She dressed in one of Mrs. Wilson's borrowed dresses, plain but clean and in much better condition than her own worn garments, and ventured out of the bedroom. Nathan sat at the table, a cup of coffee before him, studying what appeared to be a ledger. He looked up at her approach, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You look better," he observed. "I feel better," she confirmed, moving carefully to the stove. "May I pour myself some coffee?" Nathan stood quickly. "Sit, I'll get it." Felicity complied, secretly grateful as she was still unsteady on her feet. As Nathan handed her the cup, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. She dismissed it as a symptom of her weakened state. "Mrs. Wilson tells me you've been to my farm every day," she said, cradling the warm cup. Nathan nodded, resuming his seat. "Just keeping an eye on things. And Bartholomew, has your understanding held?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Let's call it an ongoing negotiation." The shared moment of amusement felt strange but pleasant. Felicity studied him over her coffee cup, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the calloused hands that could apparently be gentle enough to nurse crops and repair chicken coops. In repose, away from the scrutiny of the town, he looked less fearsome, though no less formidable. "Mr. Aldridge, Nathan," he interrupted. "If you're going to stay in my home, you might as well use my given name." "Nathan," she amended, the name feeling oddly intimate on her tongue. "I've been thinking about my situation. I believe I could return to my farm tomorrow. I'm much stronger now," he frowned. "Mrs. Wilson doesn't think you're ready." "With all due respect to Mrs. Wilson, I know my own capabilities," Felicity insisted. "And every day I spend here is another day my farm suffers, despite your kind attention." Nathan studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her determination against her physical condition. Finally, he nodded. "Tomorrow, then, but I'll be checking on you daily." It wasn't a request, and strangely, Felicity found she didn't mind. The thought of his regular visits was comforting rather than intrusive. "I should also discuss repaying you," she continued, "for settling my account at Porter's and for your hospitality." Nathan's expression hardened. "It's not a debt." "Everything is a debt in some form, Mr. Aldridge." "Nathan," Felicity countered, "I won't have people saying I took advantage of your kindness." "I don't care what people say," he replied bluntly. "Well, I do." Felicity set down her cup with more force than intended. "My reputation is all I have in this town. As a woman alone, I'm already subject to enough speculation and judgment without adding financial impropriety to the list." Nathan's brow furrowed, as if the complexities of a woman's social position had never occurred to him before. Perhaps they hadn't. "What do you propose?" he finally asked. Felicity had given this considerable thought during her bedridden hours. "Once my crops are harvested, I can repay the store credit. As for your time and hospitality—" She hesitated, then committed to her plan. "I'm a skilled seamstress. I noticed your shirts could use mending and winter is coming. I could make you new shirts, warmer ones." Nathan looked surprised by the offer. "That's not necessary." "It is to me," Felicity insisted. "Please allow me this much dignity." Something in her plea seemed to reach him. He nodded once, conceding the point. "Fine. But no rushing your recovery for the sake of pride." "Deal, deal," Felicity agreed, feeling as though they had reached an important understanding. The rest of the day passed quietly. Mrs. Wilson arrived with a pot of stew and more clean clothes for Felicity, expressing reservations about her plan to return to the farm so soon. But seeing Felicity's determined expression, she eventually sighed and provided instructions for continued recovery instead. By the time evening fell, Felicity had spent more hours awake than asleep for the first time in days. She sat on Nathan's small porch, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, watching as he tended to his horses in the corral. There was a gentle way he handled the animals that contradicted the harsh tales she'd heard about him in town. When he finished, He joined her on the porch, sitting at a respectful distance. "Beautiful evening," Felicity remarked, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Nathan grunted in agreement, following her gaze upward. After a comfortable silence, he spoke unexpectedly. "Why did you come out here? A woman alone, taking on a failing farm?" The direct question startled her, but Felicity found she didn't mind. After all he had done for her, he deserved some honesty. "My father died last year," she began, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "He was a professor in Boston, respected but not wealthy. What little he left went to pay his medical debts. My fiancée." She paused, the memory still painful. "My fiancé decided that a penniless wife was not to his advantage, despite our 3-year engagement." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I had 2 choices: become a governess or a companion to some wealthy dowager, forever dependent on others' charity, or make my own way. I had a small inheritance from my mother, enough for a train ticket west and a down payment on cheap land." Felicity smiled slightly. The advertisement for the Harper place promised fertile soil and a fresh start. It didn't mention the dilapidated buildings, the untamed land, or the suspicion with which a single Eastern woman would be greeted. "Advertisements rarely mention the hard parts," Nathan commented dryly. "No," Felicity agreed, "but I don't regret my decision despite the difficulties. For the first time in my life, I answer to no one but myself. There's freedom in that, even with all the hardship." Nathan nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Freedom's worth fighting for." "Yes," Felicity said softly, feeling an unexpected kinship with this taciturn man. "It is." They sat in companionable silence as night fully descended, each lost in their own thoughts, yet somehow less alone than they had been before. The next morning, Nathan hitched his wagon and helped Felicity climb aboard, ignoring her protests that she could manage. Mrs. Wilson had packed them a basket of food and given Nathan strict instructions about Felicity's care, which he'd accepted with stoic patience. The ride to Felicity's farm took nearly an hour, over rough terrain that jostled the wagon despite Nathan's careful driving. By the time they arrived, Felicity was pale but determined not to show weakness. The Harper place looked better than when she'd left it. The vegetable garden was thriving, the chicken coop repaired, and someone, Nathan, obviously had cleared away some of the accumulated debris around the small cabin. "You've been busy," Felicity observed as he helped her down from the wagon. Nathan shrugged. "Didn't have much else to do." This was patently untrue. A working ranch required constant attention, but Felicity didn't challenge him. Instead, she made her way slowly to the cabin, steeling herself for what she might find inside. To her surprise, the interior was clean and orderly. The sparse furniture had been arranged more efficiently, the floors swept, and fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the small table. "Mrs. Wilson came out yesterday," Nathan explained, noting her surprise. "Said a sick woman shouldn't return to a dusty house." Felicity felt tears prick her eyes at this unexpected kindness. In Boston, she had been surrounded by people yet often felt alone. Here in the wilderness, she had found more genuine care among strangers than among her father's so-called friends. "Thank you," she said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate, Nathan nodded awkwardly, then began bringing in supplies from the wagon: food, clean linens, and a small sack of seeds. "For the garden," he explained when she questioned the latter. "Radishes. They'll grow quick before the first frost." As he continued unloading, Felicity moved to the window, looking out at her small farm with fresh eyes. The land was good, as promised, and with proper care, it could provide a comfortable living. But the work required was monumental for a single person, especially one recovering from illness. "I've been thinking about your situation with Blackwood," Nathan said, coming to stand beside her. "There might be a way to meet his terms without exhausting yourself." Felicity turned to him, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, a partnership?" he suggested, his voice gruff as if the words were difficult. "Temporary, just until you're back on your feet. I provide labor and some capital. You provide the land and knowledge. We split the profits from the first harvest." Felicity stared at him, taken aback by the proposal. "Why would you do that? What do you gain?" Nathan's gaze was steady. "Extra income never hurts, and I've been meaning to expand my own crops next season. This would be good practice." She sensed there was more to his offer than practical considerations, but she couldn't fathom his true motives. Still, the proposal made sense. With his help, she could keep the farm and repay Blackwood. Once stable, she could continue alone. "A temporary partnership," she repeated, considering the idea, "with clear terms and expectations." "Written down if you want," Nathan agreed. "And our arrangement remains professional," Felicity added, suddenly aware of how a partnership with a single man might appear to the gossiping townsfolk. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, disappointment, perhaps? But he nodded. "Professional," he confirmed. "Then I accept," Felicity decided, extending her hand to seal the agreement. Nathan's larger hand engulfed hers, warm and calloused. The contact lingered a moment longer than necessary before they both pulled away. "I should return to my ranch," he said, breaking the strange tension between them. "Get my own chores done before tomorrow. I'll be back at dawn to start work here." As Felicity watched him drive away, she wondered if she had made a wise decision. Nathan Aldridge remained a mystery, a feared gunslinger who fixed chicken coops and brought wildflowers. A loner who offered partnership to a woman he barely knew. A man whose touch lingered on her skin long after he had gone. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful for his help. With his strength and her determination, perhaps she could keep her small piece of freedom after all. The following weeks established a routine that surprised them both with its ease. Nathan would arrive at dawn, bringing supplies or tools needed for the day's work. They would discuss priorities over a simple breakfast that Felicity insisted on preparing, then work separately or together, depending on the tasks. Nathan took charge of the heavier labor, repairing fences, preparing fields for future planting, reinforcing the cabin and outbuildings against the coming winter. Felicity focused on the garden, tending the rapidly growing vegetables with care, preserving what could be preserved, and preparing the rest for market. To her surprise, Nathan proved knowledgeable about farming as well as ranching. His suggestions were practical and often innovative, born of years living off the land. "My father believed in understanding the full cycle," he explained one afternoon as they harvested carrots together. "Cattle need feed, feed needs good soil, everything connects." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Felicity observed, watching as Nathan's strong hands gently extracted a carrot from the earth. A shadow crossed his face. "He taught me everything I know about working the land. Wouldn't recognize what I became after he died, though." It was the most personal information he had volunteered, and Felicity treated it with the respect it deserved. "People change according to their circumstances," she said carefully. "My father wanted me to be a proper Boston lady, married well and focused on social obligations. I doubt he would recognize the woman I've become either." Nathan's eyes met hers, unexpected understanding passing between them. Would that disappoint him? Felicity considered the question honestly. Perhaps initially. "But ultimately, I think he would respect my choice to forge my own path, even if it wasn't the one he envisioned." "Your father sounds like a wise man too," Nathan said, echoing her earlier words with the ghost of a smile. Such moments of connection became more frequent as they worked side by side. Felicity found herself looking forward to Nathan's arrival each morning, missing his quiet presence when he returned to his own ranch each evening. She told herself it was merely appreciation for his help and company after months of solitude. Nothing more. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when their hands accidentally touched, or how she found herself noticing small details about him, the way sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, how his stern expression softened when he thought no one was looking, the gentle way he spoke to her mule, Bartholomew, despite their ongoing negotiations. 2 weeks into their partnership, they took their first trip to town together to sell some of the early harvest. Felicity had regained much of her strength, though she remained thinner than before her illness. Nathan insisted on driving the wagon, watching her with a protective eye that both irritated and touched her. The town's reaction to their arrival together was immediate, and predictable conversations halted. Curious glances were exchanged, and more than one person stared openly at the unlikely pair. Nathan ignored the attention with practiced indifference, but Felicity felt her cheeks warm under the scrutiny. "Perhaps I should have come alone," she murmured as Nathan helped her down from the wagon. "And let them think you're still struggling," he countered quietly. "Better they see you strong and successful with a business partner. Gives them less to gossip about." His reasoning made sense, but the speculative looks from the women outside the general store suggested the gossip had already begun. Felicity straightened her spine, determined to face the town with dignity. Their first stop was Porter's store, where Felicity intended to settle part of her account with the proceeds from their vegetables. The storekeeper's eyebrows rose as they entered together, but he greeted them cordially. "Miss Hammond, good to see you recovered," he said, genuine relief in his voice. "And Mr. Aldridge, of course." "Mr. Porter," Felicity nodded. "I've brought some vegetables to sell if you're interested. The quality is excellent." Porter examined their offerings, carrots, radishes, and late summer squash with a merchant's critical eye. "Fine produce indeed. I can give you $8 for the lot." "12, Nathan countered immediately. "It's worth 15 at Denver prices." Porter seemed startled by Nathan's involvement but recovered quickly. "We're not in Denver, Mr. Aldridge. $9. 11, Felicity interjected, finding her voice. "And we'll bring you first choice of the potatoes when they're harvested next week." Porter glanced between them, visibly calculating. $10 and the potato promise. That's my final offer." Felicity looked to Nathan, who gave a slight nod. "Agreed," she said, extending her hand to seal the deal. As Porter counted out the money, the store door opened, admitting Josiah Blackwood. The banker paused, his narrow face registering surprise at finding Felicity and Nathan together. "Miss Hammond," he greeted, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "What a pleasant surprise." "I was beginning to worry when you missed our regular meeting last week." "Mr. Blackwood," Felicity acknowledged, accepting the money from Porter with a steady hand. "As you can see, I've been quite busy with the harvest." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Nathan, his expression cooling further. "Mr. Aldridge, I wasn't aware you had taken an interest in Miss Hammond's enterprise." "Business partnership," Nathan replied flatly, his stance subtly shifting to place himself partially between Felicity and the banker. "Miss Hammond has impressive agricultural knowledge." "I'm learning a great deal." The implication that Nathan Aldridge, known for his self-sufficiency, would seek farming advice from a woman clearly baffled Blackwood. His thin lips compressed into a disapproving line. "Indeed, how fascinating." He turned back to Felicity. "I must remind you, Miss Hammond, that our agreement requires a payment of $200 by month's end. That's just 2 weeks away. I trust your partnership will enable you to meet that obligation. It will, Felicity assured him, though inwardly she calculated quickly. Even with Nathan's help and the promising harvest, reaching $200 would be a challenge. I look forward to seeing that, Blackwood said with a smile that suggested the opposite. Good day to you both. After he departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the store. Porter busied himself arranging the newly purchased vegetables, while Nathan's expression had darkened considerably. That man, he said quietly as they exited the store, has been foreclosing on struggling homesteaders for years. Buys the land cheap, sells it dear to Eastern investors. Makes a tidy profit while families lose everything. You seem to know a lot about his business practices, Felicity observed. Nathan's jaw tightened. My family's ranch went to auction after my father died during the war. I was away fighting, couldn't get back in time. Blackwood handled the sale. When I returned, the price had mysteriously tripled from what neighboring properties sold for. Understanding dawned. So you couldn't buy it back? Not then, Nathan confirmed. Took me 5 years to save enough for the place I have now, smaller but mind-free and clear. Felicity absorbed this information, seeing Nathan in a new light. His hard exterior made more sense now, a man who had lost everything and fought to rebuild, mistrustful of a world that had taken so much from him. We won't let him take my farm, she said with quiet determination. Nathan's gaze met hers, something warm kindling in his eyes. No, he agreed. We won't. Their next stop was the bank itself, where Felicity deposited $8 toward her loan, keeping $2 for supplies. The clerk recorded the payment with obvious surprise, glancing curiously at Nathan, who waited near the door, his discomfort with the establishment evident. That leaves $192 due by month's end, Miss Hammond, the clerk informed her. Mr. Blackwood will be pleased to see you making progress. Felicity doubted that very much, but thanked him politely before rejoining Nathan. $192, Nathan murmured as they walked toward the wagon. The potatoes will bring maybe 30 if we're lucky. The rest of the vegetables another 20. That's still a large gap. I know, Felicity sighed. I had hoped to sell some preserves as well, but there simply wasn't enough harvest to put up substantial quantities. Nathan was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I might have a solution, he finally said, but it would mean leaving your farm for a few days. What kind of solution? There's a cattle auction in Cheyenne next week. I was planning to sell some of my stock anyway. With 2 of us, we could drive a larger herd. The prices are good this time of year, could be enough to make up the difference. Felicity considered the proposal. She had never driven cattle before, and the thought of traveling alone with Nathan for several days brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. Would it be proper? She asked hesitantly. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. We'd take Mrs. Wilson along as chaperone. She's been complaining about wanting to visit her sister in Cheyenne anyway. The solution was practical, if unexpected. You've thought this through, Felicity observed. Been considering it since Blackwood mentioned the deadline, Nathan admitted. It's risky, weather could turn, prices could drop, but it's the best chance we have. The fact that he said we instead of you wasn't lost on Felicity. Somehow her problem had become their problem, a shared burden between partners. The realization warmed her more than it should have. Then I accept, she decided. When would we leave? Day after tomorrow, Nathan replied. Need time to gather the herd and prepare. As they rode back to her farm, Felicity contemplated the rapidly changing circumstances of her life. A month ago, she had been slowly starving, too proud to ask for help, facing the loss of everything she had worked for. Now she was planning a cattle drive with a man the town feared, but who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Life in the West was unpredictable indeed. The preparation for the cattle drive consumed the next day entirely. Nathan arrived before dawn with additional supplies and clear instructions. Felicity spent the morning harvesting everything ready in the garden, preserving what she could, and arranging for a neighbor's son to tend to Bartholomew and the chickens during her absence. Nathan focused on preparing her wagon for the journey, reinforcing weak points and ensuring the wheels were sound. By midday, they drove to Nathan's ranch to begin gathering the cattle he intended to sell. Felicity had never visited his property before and was struck by its neat efficiency. The cabin was similar to her own but better maintained, the barn solid and well designed, the corrals sturdy. Everything spoke of careful planning and hard work. "It's lovely," she said honestly as Nathan helped her down from the wagon. He seemed pleased by her approval, though he merely shrugged. "It's functional. It's more than that," Felicity insisted. "It's a home." Something softened in his expression, trying to make it one. He led her to the corral where his cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, a small herd but healthy with glossy coats and good weight. "I'm selling 10 head, Nathan explained. "Should fetch at least $20 each, maybe more. With your produce money and what we can get for a few more of my cattle if needed, we should meet Blackwood's terms." "Your cattle," Felicity emphasized, troubled. "Nathan, you shouldn't have to sell your livestock to save my farm." "It's an investment," he countered pragmatically. "I'll recoup it when we split the farm's profits." She wasn't entirely convinced by his reasoning but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Further argument would be futile. "I know nothing about driving cattle," she admitted instead. "I'll slow you down." Nathan's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You'll learn. You're a quick study." The compliment, delivered in his matter-of-fact tone, pleased her more than it should have. "I'll try not to embarrass myself too badly." "You won't," he said with surprising conviction. They spent the afternoon gathering the cattle Nathan had selected and preparing them for the drive. He taught Felicity the basics of herding, how to position herself, how to anticipate the animals' movements, how to use her voice and presence to guide them. To her surprise, she found she had a natural affinity for the work, earning a rare nod of approval from Nathan when she successfully turned a straying heifer back to the herd. Mrs. Wilson arrived in the evening, bringing food and an assessing gaze that missed nothing of the dynamic between Felicity and Nathan. "So we're off to Cheyenne," she said as they ate supper in Nathan's cabin. "Been years since I've seen my sister. Though I must say, chaperoning a cattle drive wasn't how I imagined the visit." "We appreciate your willingness to accompany us," Felicity said sincerely. "It would be impossible otherwise." Mrs. Wilson waved away her thanks. "Nonsense. I've been looking for an excuse to go. My Harold drove cattle in his younger days, said it was the most honest work a man could do, being alone with the land and sky." "Your husband was a wise man," Nathan commented, surprising both women with his contribution to the conversation. Mrs. Wilson studied him with newfound interest. "He was indeed, Mr. Aldridge. Very much like yourself, in some ways quiet, thoughtful, stronger than he looked." Nathan appeared uncomfortable with the comparison but nodded respectfully before turning the conversation to practical matters of the journey ahead. That night, Felicity slept in Nathan's bed while he took the floor of the main room and Mrs. Wilson claimed the small guest cot. Despite the long day, Felicity found sleep elusive, her mind filled with thoughts of the journey ahead and the man sleeping just beyond her door. She couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward Nathan. It wasn't simply gratitude for his help, though that remained. It was deeper an appreciation for his quiet strength, his understated integrity, the glimpses of gentleness she occasionally witnessed. The notorious gunslinger of Riverton was revealing himself to be a far more complex man than rumors suggested. But what did he feel for her? His actions spoke of care and concern, yet he maintained a careful distance, never overstepping the bounds of their partnership. Was it respect for her independence, or simply lack of interest beyond their business arrangement? Felicity pushed these thoughts aside. The coming days would require all her focus and energy. Personal feelings, whatever they might be, would have to wait. The cattle drive began at dawn the following day. Nathan had explained their route north from Riverton toward Cheyenne, following the established trail that skirted the mountains. With good weather and no complications, they would reach the auction in 4 days, just in time for the monthly sale. Mrs. Wilson rode in Felicity's wagon, which followed behind the small herd. Nathan took the lead on horseback, with Felicity riding a gentle mare he had provided, positioned to help keep the cattle together. The animals moved slowly but steadily, seeming to understand the purpose of their journey. The first day passed without incident, the cattle behaving well under Nathan's experienced guidance. By sunset, they had covered nearly 15 miles, a good pace, according to Nathan. They made camp in a small valley with good grass for the cattle and a clear stream for water. While Nathan secured the herd for the night, Felicity and Mrs. Wilson prepared a simple supper over the campfire. The older woman worked with practiced efficiency, occasionally glancing toward Nathan with a knowing expression that made Felicity self-conscious. "He watches you, you know, Mrs. Wilson commented casually as she stirred the bean pot. Felicity nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "When you're not looking," Mrs. Wilson continued undeterred. "That man has eyes only for you. It's quite something, considering how little attention he's paid to any woman since returning from the war." "We're business partners," Felicity insisted, though her cheeks warmed. "He's concerned for my well-being after my illness, nothing more." Mrs. Wilson made a non-committal sound. "If you say so, dear. Though in my experience, men don't sell their livestock or work dawn to dusk on farms that aren't theirs for mere business partners." Before Felicity could formulate a response, Nathan approached the fire, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "Cattle are settled," he reported, accepting the plate Felicity handed him with a nod of thanks. "Weather looks clear for tomorrow, should make good time." The three ate in companionable silence, the vastness of the Wyoming territory spreading around them in all directions. After the meal, Mrs. Wilson retired to the wagon for sleep, leaving Felicity and Nathan alone by the fire. "How are you finding the journey so far?" Nathan asked, his voice soft in the quiet night. "Challenging but exhilarating," Felicity admitted. "There's something freeing about being on the open trail." Nathan nodded, understanding in his expression. "That's why I prefer ranch work to town life. Out here a person is judged by their actions, not rumors or past mistakes." "Is that why you avoid Riverton?" "The rumors?" He stared into the fire, considering his answer. "Partly. After the war, I came back different, harder, did things I'm not proud of to survive and get back on my feet. Town has a long memory for a man's worst moments." "Yet you've been nothing but kind to me," Felicity observed quietly. Nathan's gaze lifted to meet hers across the flames. "You needed help, and you remind me." He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Felicity waited, but when he didn't continue, she gently prompted, "I remind you of what?" "Of who I wanted to be before life got in the way," he finally said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. Someone who builds things instead of tearing them down. Someone who helps instead of hurts. The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within her. I think you are that person, Nathan. Whatever you've done, whatever reputation you've earned, I've seen your true character in how you've treated me, in how you care for your animals, your land, in how you fight for what's right, even when it costs you. Nathan looked away, uncomfortable with her assessment yet seemingly affected by it. You don't know everything about me. I know enough, Felicity insisted. The rest you can tell me when you're ready if you want to. The moment between them stretched, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Nathan stood, breaking the spell. Dawn comes early, he said gruffly. You should get some rest. Felicity nodded, recognizing his retreat for what it was, not rejection, but self-protection. A man unaccustomed to openness needed time to adjust to the possibility of being known, truly known, by another person. Good night, Nathan, she said softly as she rose to her feet. Good night, Felicity, he replied, and the sound of her name on his lips followed her into dreams. The second day of the drive brought new challenges. A light rain began mid-morning, making the trail slick and the cattle restless. Nathan remained calm, issuing clear instructions that helped Felicity adjust to the changing conditions. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds on the horizon suggested worse weather might follow. We need to find better shelter than planned, Nathan announced as they paused to rest the herd. There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead, used by the big ranchers during roundup. Should be empty this time of year. Will it accommodate all of us? Felicity asked, concerned. It'll be tight, he admitted, but better than being exposed if that storm hits. They pushed forward with increased urgency, the cattle sensing the humans' concern and moving more quickly than before. As the first distant rumble of thunder reached them, the line shack came into view, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a hillside, with a crude corral nearby. Nathan moved with practiced efficiency, directing Felicity and Mrs. Wilson to take shelter in the shack while he secured the cattle in the corral and covered the wagon. By the time he joined them inside, rain was falling in sheets, driven by a rising wind. The interior of the shack was basic, but found a single room with a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk built into the wall. Mrs. Wilson immediately took charge, lighting the stove with supplies left by previous occupants and assessing their situation. Well, she declared, this is cozy. The understatement drew an unexpected chuckle from Nathan and a smile from Felicity as they removed their wet coats. The space was indeed cramped for 3 adults, but compared to the storm outside, it felt welcoming. The storm won't last all night, Nathan predicted, moving to the single window to study the clouds. Probably pass through in a few hours. Then we'll make the best of it, Mrs. Wilson decided. I have some bread and jerky in my bag, not much of a supper, but it will suffice. They ate their simple meal as rain pounded the roof and thunder occasionally shook the small building. Despite the close quarters and howling storm, Felicity found herself enjoying the unexpected intimacy of their situation. Nathan seemed more at ease in this rustic setting than he ever appeared in town, sharing stories of previous cattle drives and listening with genuine interest to Mrs. Wilson's tales of frontier life. As evening deepened, the question of sleeping arrangements arose. Mrs. Wilson should take the bunk, Nathan said immediately. Felicity and I can manage with blankets on the floor. Nonsense, the older woman countered. My old bones are used to discomfort. Miss Hammond needs proper rest after her illness. She takes the bunk. Both turned to Felicity, who felt uncomfortable with either option. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Mrs. Wilson insisted. I'll take this corner by the stove where it's warmest. Mr. Aldridge can have the space by the door. Propriety is maintained and everyone gets some rest." Her tone brooked no argument, and the arrangement was settled. As they prepared for sleep, the storm gradually diminished, leaving only a steady rain pattering on the roof. Mrs. Wilson soon began to snore softly, her practical nature allowing her to find rest despite the circumstances. Felicity lay awake on the narrow bunk, acutely aware of Nathan's presence across the small room. In the dim light from the banked stove, she could just make out his silhouette as he sat with his back against the wall, apparently keeping watch rather than sleeping. "Nathan," she whispered, not wanting to wake Mrs. Wilson, "you should rest too." He turned toward her voice. "I'm fine. Used to keeping watch on the trail. We're safe here," she pointed out, "and you need sleep as much as anyone." There was a moment of silence before he responded, his voice even lower than before. "Thank you for your concern." The simple acknowledgement warmed her. "That's what partners do, isn't it? Look out for each other." "Partners," he repeated, and something in his tone suggested he was turning the word over in his mind, examining it from different angles. "Is that what we are, Felicity? Just partners?" The question hung in the darkness between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Felicity's heart quickened, and she was grateful for the dimness that hid her blush. She began, then hesitated, uncertain how to express the complicated emotions that had developed over their weeks together. "I value our partnership greatly." It was a safe answer, non-committal, yet not entirely honest. Nathan seemed to sense this, remaining silent for long enough that Felicity wondered if he would respond at all. "I value it too," he finally said, his deep voice barely audible over the rain. "More than I expected to." There was a vulnerability in that simple admission that touched Felicity deeply. Before she could respond, however, Mrs. Wilson stirred in her sleep, reminding them of her presence. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement, however tentative, that their connection might extend beyond business. "Good night, Nathan," Felicity whispered, closing her eyes. "Good night, Felicity," came the soft reply. "Sleep well." Morning arrived with clearing skies and mud-slicked trails. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the brightening blue above. Despite the challenging conditions, they made good progress, the cattle seemingly eager to move after their confinement during the storm. By the fourth day, Cheyenne appeared on the horizon, a growing cluster of buildings that represented both opportunity and civilization. Nathan guided them to the auction grounds on the outskirts of town, where other ranchers were already gathering with their stock. "The auction begins tomorrow morning," he explained as they secured the cattle in designated pens. "Tonight we'll get rooms at the hotel and rest. Been a long journey." Felicity realized this meant their party would separate Mrs. Wilson to her sister's home, Nathan and herself to the hotel, but in different rooms. The thought of being apart from him after days of constant companionship brought an unexpected pang. The Western Hotel was modest but clean, catering to the ranchers and traders who frequented Cheyenne. As Nathan arranged for their rooms, Felicity became aware of curious glances from other patrons. A woman traveling with cattle was unusual enough to draw attention, especially one dressed in the practical riding clothes she had worn for the drive. "Your room is next to mine," Nathan informed her as they climbed the stairs. "I thought it best for safety." The consideration touched her. "Thank you. Will you join me for supper? I find I'm famished after our journey." "After we've both had a chance to clean up," he agreed, seeming pleased by the invitation. An hour later, refreshed by a proper bath and dressed in the one clean dress she had packed, Felicity met Nathan in the hotel dining room. He too had cleaned up, his dark hair still damp, wearing a clean shirt that she recognized as one she had mended for him. The sight of him, freshly shaved and more relaxed than she had ever seen him, caused a flutter in her chest that she couldn't ignore. They chose a table near the window, away from most other diners. As they studied their menus, Nathan spoke quietly. "You look beautiful," he said, the compliment clearly unfamiliar on his tongue but no less sincere for it. "The journey agreed with you." Felicity felt color rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. I feel stronger than I have in months, despite the rigors of the trail. Good food and proper rest will do that," he observed. "Something you were lacking before." There was a note of gentle reproof in his words that Felicity acknowledged with a slight smile. "I was too proud to ask for help, a failing that nearly cost me everything." "Pride isn't always a failing," Nathan countered. "It kept you fighting when others might have given up." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm learning that accepting help doesn't mean surrendering independence." Nathan nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That's a hard lesson for anyone. Took me years to learn it myself." Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on topics they hadn't had time to explore during their busy partnership. Books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Felicity discovered that beneath Nathan's taciturn exterior lay a thoughtful mind and unexpected depths of knowledge, particularly about history and natural sciences. "My father believed in education," he explained when she expressed surprise at his familiarity with classical literature. "Had books shipped from back east every year. Said a man could be both tough and intelligent, that the combination was unbeatable." "Your father was right," Felicity smiled, "and you are living proof of his philosophy." Nathan looked momentarily discomfited by the compliment, but pleasure showed in his eyes. "What about your father? What would he think of your Western adventure?" "He would be horrified and fascinated in equal measure," Felicity laughed. "He spent his life among books and ideas. The practical realities of frontier life would shock him. But he always encouraged my independence of thought, even when it wasn't fashionable for young ladies." "He raised a remarkable daughter," Nathan said quietly, his gaze direct. The compliment, delivered with such simple sincerity, rendered Felicity momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, Nathan continued, his tone becoming more practical. "About tomorrow, cattle auctions can be unpredictable. Prices fluctuate based on who's buying and how many others are selling. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that we might not get the full amount we need." Felicity nodded, appreciating his honesty. "What happens then?" "I have some savings," Nathan admitted. "Not much, but enough to cover any shortfall. We'll meet Blackwood's terms one way or another." "Nathan, I can't let you. It's not charity," he interrupted firmly. "It's an investment in our partnership, in the future." Something in the way he said "future" sent a warm current through Felicity's veins. Before she could question his meaning, Nathan changed the subject, asking about her plans for expanding the vegetable garden come spring. The moment passed, but his words lingered in her mind throughout the evening. As they parted at her door, an awkward silence fell between them. Felicity found herself reluctant to end their evening, while Nathan seemed equally hesitant to leave. "Thank you for dinner," she said finally, "and for everything these past weeks. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't been there that day in town." Nathan's expression softened, the hard lines of his face relaxing into something approaching tenderness. "I'm glad I was there," he said simply. "Good night, Felicity." "Good night, Nathan." As her door closed between them, Felicity leaned against it, her heart racing with emotions she could no longer deny. Somewhere between her collapse in his arms and this quiet evening in Cheyenne, she had fallen in love with Nathan Aldridge. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. What she couldn't know was that on the other side of the door, Nathan stood motionless, experiencing a similar epiphany. The woman who had fainted at his feet had somehow worked her way past defenses built over years of solitude and loss. For the first time since before the war, he found himself contemplating a future that included someone else, a shared life, rather than a solitary existence. The thought terrified him more than any gunfight ever had. The cattle auction began early the following morning, the grounds already bustling with activity as buyers and sellers prepared for the day's business. Nathan guided Felicity through the crowded pens, explaining the process as they went. "Our lot will come up mid-morning," he said, checking that their cattle were properly presented. "The auctioneer knows his business. Just let me handle the bidding." Felicity nodded, trusting his expertise. As they moved through the auction grounds, she noticed the respect Nathan commanded. Men nodded to him, stepped aside, watched him with wary deference. His reputation had clearly traveled beyond Riverton. "Mr. Aldridge," a voice called, and they turned to find a well-dressed man approaching. "Didn't expect to see you here this season." "Mr. Hopkins," Nathan acknowledged. "Miss Hammond, this is Thomas Hopkins, buyer for the Union Pacific Railroad. They purchase beef to feed their work crews. Mr. Hopkins, my partner, Miss Felicity Hammond." Hopkins tipped his hat to Felicity, curiosity evident in his expression. "A pleasure, Miss Hammond. Partner, you say? That's a new development." "Recent but productive," Nathan replied evenly. "We're selling 10 head today. Quality stock, knowing you," Hopkins observed. "I'll keep an eye out for your lot." After he departed, Felicity raised an eyebrow at Nathan. "The railroad buys beef, thousands of pounds monthly," Nathan confirmed. "Hopkins pays fair prices for good quality. If he bids on our cattle, others will follow his lead." The auction proceeded with the controlled chaos of commerce. Animals presented, bids called, deals struck in rapid succession. When their cattle entered the ring, Nathan stood taller, his expression focused. Felicity watched in fascination as the auctioneer described their stock in glowing terms, emphasizing their health and weight. Bidding began at $15 per head, already lower than Nathan had hoped. Hopkins entered the bidding at $18, which triggered a response from other buyers. The price climbed steadily to $22 per head, then stalled. $220 for the lot, the auctioneer called. Going once, Felicity held her breath. It was enough to pay Blackwood with a small margin, but barely. Going twice. $25 per head, came a new voice from the back of the crowd. Nathan tensed beside her, his hand instinctively moving closer to his sidearm. Felicity followed his gaze to see a tall, elegantly dressed man with cold eyes and a calculating smile. "Who is that?" she whispered. "James Wilcox," Nathan replied tightly. "Cattle baron from Colorado. Bad blood between his outfit and mine." Wilcox's bid raised the total to $250, a very generous price that seemed designed to provoke rather than acquire cattle. The other bidders dropped out, leaving only Wilcox in the field. "Sold to Mr. Wilcox for $250, the auctioneer declared, bringing down his gavel. As they moved to complete the transaction, Wilcox approached, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Aldridge," he greeted coolly. "Quite the coincidence finding your stock here today." "No coincidence at all," Nathan replied, his voice level despite the tension evident in his stance. "Regular auction, regular business." Wilcox's gaze shifted to Felicity, assessing her in a way that made her skin crawl. "And who is this lovely companion?" "Miss Hammond is my business partner," Nathan stated before Felicity could respond. "The cattle are jointly owned." "Fascinating," Wilcox drawled. "I've never known Nathan Aldridge to share anything, let alone with a woman." He extended a hand toward Felicity, which she reluctantly accepted. "James Wilcox, at your service, Miss Hammond, should you ever tire of your current partnership. My operation would welcome a woman of your obvious quality." Nathan's jaw clenched visibly, but he maintained his composure. "We need to complete the paperwork, Wilcox, if you'll excuse us." "Of course," Wilcox agreed, releasing Felicity's hand. "A pleasure doing business with you both. I'll collect the cattle within the hour." As he walked away, Felicity could feel Nathan's controlled anger radiating from him. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "Why would he pay above market value for our cattle?" "To make a point," Nathan answered grimly. "3 years ago, his men tried to force me off my land. When that failed, they rustled some of my best breeding stock. I tracked them down, took back what was mine. 2 of his men didn't survive the encounter." Felicity absorbed this information, understanding better the dangerous reputation that followed Nathan. "And now he's showing that he can afford to waste money just to interfere with my business," Nathan concluded. "It's a warning he hasn't forgotten or forgiven." "But we have the money we need," Felicity pointed out, trying to find the positive aspect. "More than we need, actually." Nathan's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "Yes, we do. Let's finish the transaction and get back to Riverton. I don't want to spend any more time in Wilcox's territory than necessary." They collected their payment, $250 in cash, a substantial sum to be carrying. Nathan divided it between them for safety, tucking Felicity's portion into an inner pocket of her coat. "Keep that hidden until we're back in Riverton," he advised as they prepared to depart. "We'll leave first thing tomorrow morning." Mrs. Wilson joined them for supper that evening, full of stories about her sister's family and the changes in Cheyenne since her last visit. Her cheerful conversation helped dispel the tension from the encounter with Wilcox, allowing Felicity and Nathan to relax and enjoy their last night in town. As they prepared to return to their rooms, Mrs. Wilson made an unexpected announcement. "I've decided to extend my stay with my sister. Her youngest is expecting a baby next month and she could use the help." "But how will you get back to Riverton?" Felicity asked, concerned. "My nephew travels that way regularly for business," Mrs. Wilson explained. "He'll see me safely home when the time comes." She gave them both a meaningful look. "I trust you two can manage the return journey without a chaperone. You're business partners, after all." The emphasis she placed on the word business made it clear she suspected their relationship had evolved beyond that simple definition. Felicity felt her cheeks warm but didn't contradict the older woman. "We'll manage fine," Nathan assured her. "The return trip is easier without the cattle to drive." With that settled, they retired for the night, planning an early departure. Felicity found sleep elusive, her mind filled with thoughts of Nathan, the successful auction, and the looming confrontation with Blackwood. They had the money to meet his terms, but something told her the banker wouldn't be pleased to see them succeed. More troubling were her growing feelings for Nathan. Their partnership had an official end date once Blackwood was paid and the farm secured. There would be no need for their arrangement to continue. The thought of returning to her solitary existence filled Felicity with an unexpected sadness. Had Nathan developed similar feelings? His actions suggested care beyond mere partnership, but he remained reserved, difficult to read. Perhaps for him, their arrangement was purely practical, a temporary alliance against a common adversary. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Felicity finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The journey back to Riverton proceeded smoothly, the empty wagon making faster progress than their outbound trip with the cattle. Without Mrs. Wilson's presence, Felicity and Nathan found themselves in a new dynamic, more personal, less defined by business. Their conversations during the day's travel ranged widely, building on the connection they had established in Cheyenne. At night, they made camp under the stars, maintaining proper distance yet aware of each other in a way that charged the air between them. Nathan remained the perfect gentleman, yet Felicity sensed a growing tension in him, a careful restraint that matched her own conflicted emotions. On the third evening, as they camped within a day's journey of Riverton, Nathan finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "We need to discuss what happens after Blackwood is paid," he said as they sat beside the campfire, the darkness gathering around them. Felicity nodded, her heart quickening. "Our partnership has fulfilled its purpose. You've more than upheld your end." "Is that what you want?" Nathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "To end our partnership," the question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Felicity gathered her courage, knowing this might be their only opportunity for honesty before returning to the constraints of town life. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "The farm still needs more work than I can manage alone. The partnership has been beneficial for both of us, I believe." Nathan studied her across the flames, his expression thoughtful. "It has, but I need to know something, Felicity. Is it only the practical benefits you value? Or is there something more?" The directness of his question took her breath away. This was the moment of truth: risk everything or retreat to the safety of their business relationship. "There is more," she said softly, meeting his gaze steadily. "Much more. I value your company, your perspective, your strength of character. I've come to care for you, Nathan, in a way I never expected when you caught me that day in town." Something in his expression shifted, tension giving way to relief and something warmer. He moved around the fire to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him against the evening chill. "I've been alone a long time," he said quietly. "Thought it was better that way, safer. Then you fainted in my arms and something changed. Watching you fight for your farm with such determination despite your circumstances. It woke something in me I thought was dead." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers with gentle strength. "I don't have fancy words, Felicity, but I care for you too. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time." Felicity's heart soared at his confession, so simply stated yet profoundly moving. "What are you saying, Nathan?" "I'm saying I don't want our partnership to end with Blackwood's payment," he replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I'm saying I want to court you properly, if you'll allow it, to see if what's growing between us might become something lasting." Joy blossomed in Felicity's chest, bright and unexpected. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Nathan's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward until his lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared longing. Felicity responded with all the emotion she had held in check for weeks, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Cheyenne," he admitted. "Only since Cheyenne," Felicity teased gently. "I've wanted it since the line shack, at least." A rare, genuine smile transformed Nathan's face, making him look younger, lighter. "We should get some rest," he said reluctantly. "Tomorrow we face Blackwood, and I want us both clear-headed." Though they slept separately as before, something fundamental had changed between them. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a shared understanding and the promise of a future together. They reached Riverton by mid-afternoon the following day, heading directly to the bank. Josiah Blackwood looked up from his desk with undisguised surprise as they entered his office together, Nathan's protective presence close behind Felicity. "Miss Hammond," Blackwood greeted, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And Mr. Aldridge, what an unexpected pleasure." "We're here to settle my loan, Mr. Blackwood," Felicity stated without preamble, placing the exact amount $200 on his desk. "In full, as per our agreement." Blackwood stared at the money, then at Felicity, clearly disconcerted by this development. "I see, that is unexpected." "The full amount, you say? Count it if you wish," Nathan suggested, his tone deceptively mild. Blackwood's thin lips pressed together in displeasure, but he began counting the bills with practiced efficiency. Finding the sum correct, he reluctantly produced the mortgage document. "Everything appears to be in order," he acknowledged, signing the necessary paperwork to release Felicity's debt. "Though I must admit curiosity about how a struggling farmer managed to produce such a sum on short notice." "Good partnership," Felicity replied simply, accepting the papers that declared her farm fully hers. "Thank you for your services, Mr. Blackwood. I believe our business is concluded." The banker's eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced between them. "Indeed. Though should you require financial assistance in the future, Miss Hammond, my door is always open." "That won't be necessary," Nathan stated firmly. "Good day, Blackwood." As they exited the bank into the late afternoon sunlight, Felicity felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, her future wasn't shadowed by looming debt or possible failure. The farm was hers, free and clear. "We did it," she said, unable to contain her smile as they walked toward the wagon. Nathan took her hand, unconcerned with who might see the gesture. "You did it," he corrected. "I just helped along the way. Partners," Felicity reminded him, squeezing his hand. "Equal contributors to our success." The word partners held new meaning now, encompassing far more than their business arrangement. As they rode toward Felicity's farm, their farm, in a sense, given their shared investment in its success, the future stretched before them, full of possibility. The weeks that followed brought changes to both their lives. Nathan began courting Felicity openly, dividing his time between his ranch and her farm. The town's reaction ranged from shock to speculative interest, but neither paid much attention to the gossip. What mattered was the steady deepening of their connection as they worked side by side, building something lasting together. Felicity's farm flourished under their combined efforts. With Nathan's help, she expanded the vegetable garden and added a small orchard of hardy apple trees that would bear fruit in future years. Nathan, in turn, benefited from Felicity's organizational skills and fresh perspective on his ranching operations. Together, they created systems that improved both properties. As autumn deepened toward winter, Nathan began staying at Felicity's farm more frequently, sleeping in the small guest room she had prepared. Their courtship progressed naturally, each day strengthening their bond through shared work, conversations by the fire, and increasingly tender moments stolen between chores. On the first snow of the season, Nathan arrived at the farm with a special purpose in mind. He found Felicity in the kitchen, preserving the last of the fall harvest. She turned at his entrance, her smile warming him more effectively than the crackling stove. "You're early today," she observed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I wasn't expecting you," until her words halted as she noticed his unusual attire, a clean shirt and his best coat, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved despite the early hour. "Nathan, is something wrong?" He shook his head, crossing to take her hands in his. "Nothing's wrong. But I have something important to ask you." Felicity's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Oh," she breathed. "When you fainted in my arms that day," Nathan began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I had no idea how completely you would change my life. I was a man living half a life, closed off from everything but survival. You showed me there could be more partnership, purpose, joy. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. This was my mother's. I've kept it all these years, never thinking I'd find someone worthy of wearing it, until you. Dropping to one knee, Nathan held the ring up to Felicity, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. Felicity Hammond, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of joining our lives as we've joined our work as true partners in everything? Yes, Felicity answered without hesitation, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Nathan, with all my heart. As he slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, Nathan marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter born of desperation to a future built on mutual respect and deepening love, all because he had caught her when she fell. Their wedding took place that December in Riverton's small church, attended by Mrs. Wilson, who had returned from Cheyenne just in time, and a handful of neighbors who had come to know and respect the unlikely couple. Felicity wore a new dress of deep blue, sewn by her own hands with her mother's lace veil. Nathan wore a new suit, standing tall and proud as he spoke his vows in a voice that carried clearly through the small church. I promise to stand beside you in all things, he pledged, holding Felicity's hands in his. To build rather than destroy, to nurture what grows between us, to protect without confining. I offer all that I am and all that I have, freely and without reservation. Felicity's answering vows were equally heartfelt. I promise to be your true partner in life's journey, to face challenges by your side rather than alone, to remind you of your goodness when the world tries to make you forget. I give you my trust, my support, and my love, now and always. As they sealed their promises with a kiss, Nathan felt the last of his old defenses fall away. The harsh cowboy who had ridden into Riverton alone was gone, replaced by a man who had discovered that true strength lay not in isolation but in connection, in catching someone when they fell, and being willing to be caught in return. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons, each bringing new challenges and joys. They decided to make Felicity's farm their primary home, while maintaining Nathan's ranch as part of their growing operations. With combined resources and complementary skills, their agricultural ventures flourished beyond either's individual expectations. Word spread about the quality of their produce and livestock, attracting buyers from as far as Denver. Even Josiah Blackwood was forced to acknowledge their success, though he did so with poorly disguised resentment. His attempts to undermine their standing in the community fell flat, as more people came to know the couple through fair dealings and generous neighborly acts. The following spring brought their greatest joy, yet the news that Felicity was expecting their first child. Nathan received the announcement with uncharacteristic emotionalism, gathering his wife in a gentle embrace that spoke volumes about his happiness. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Something I never thought I'd have again." The first of many changes that day in town set in motion, Felicity agreed, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "All because you were there to catch me." "Best thing I ever did," Nathan replied with absolute conviction. Their son, William Harold Aldridge, arrived on a crisp October morning in 1879, with Mrs. Wilson serving as midwife. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. Nathan, who had paced anxiously throughout Felicity's labor, held his son with reverent wonder, the last vestiges of his hardened past melting away in the face of this new life. "He's perfect," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "He is," Felicity agreed tiredly from her bed. And so, is this life we've built together? As winter settled once again over Riverton, the Aldridge home stood warm and welcoming against the snow, a testament to what could grow from the most unexpected beginnings. Inside, Nathan sat before the fire, his son sleeping peacefully in his arms while Felicity worked on a new quilt beside him. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, careful not to wake the baby, "about expanding the orchard come spring. There's good land on the north side that would suit more apple trees. Thinking long term." "For William?" Felicity asked with a knowing smile. "And whoever might come after him," Nathan acknowledged. "Building something that lasts, that's what matters now." Felicity set aside her sewing to move closer, leaning against his shoulder as she gazed at their sleeping child. "You've changed so much since that first day," she observed softly. Nathan considered this. "Not changed," he decided after a moment. Remembered. Remembered who I was meant to be before the world tried to make me something harder, colder." He turned to press a kiss to her temple. "You reminded me, Felicity. Every day since you fell into my arms, you've reminded me. And you showed me that independence doesn't have to mean isolation," she replied, taking his free hand in hers. "That true strength comes from connection, not separation." As the fire crackled and their son slept peacefully between them, Nathan and Felicity Aldridge contemplated the journey that had brought them together from desperate strangers to devoted partners, building a life rich with purpose and love. It had begun with a moment of crisis, a woman fainting from hunger, a man catching her despite his guarded heart. But it had grown into something neither could have imagined on that dusty Riverton street. Outside, snow began to fall softly, covering the land in pristine white. But inside the farmhouse that had once stood empty and neglected, warmth and life flourished, a testament to what could grow when pride gave way to partnership, when isolation yielded to love, when two people found in each other exactly what they needed to become their best selves. And as the years passed, the story of the harsh cowboy who softened when a starving woman fainted in his arms became part of Riverton's lore, not as gossip or cautionary tale, but as proof that even in the wild territory of Wyoming, where life was often brutal and unforgiving, transformation was possible, and love could take root in the most unexpected places.